The Secretary's Shadow, a symphony of broken trust and rebirth. Book 1. The Architecture of Deception. Chapter 1. The First Fracture. The first fracture appeared in the foundation of our marriage like a hairline crack in marble, almost invisible to the untrained eye. But to me, it screamed betrayal in silent tremors. David's cologne, once a comforting anchor of cedar and sandalwood, now carried an undercurrent of something foreign, floral, sweet, hers. I'd catch it when he'd kiss my cheek after work, his lips cold against my skin, his mind already miles away in some clandestine meeting I wasn't privy to. I dismissed it. Paranoia, I told myself. The scent of a colleague's handshake, an elevator ride, a crowded boardroom. Anything but the truth that was clawing at my subconscious with sharpened talons. I'm Emily Elizabeth Harrington, 34 years old. 8 years, married to David Michael Harrington, my college sweetheart, the boy who'd memorized my coffee order by our second date, double shot vanilla latte, extra foam, and proposed under a canopy of cherry blossoms in full bloom during our senior year spring formal. We'd built what appeared to be a perfect life in our suburban sanctuary, a 2-story colonial with a garden I'd painstakingly planted with peonies and lavender, a mortgage we'd proudly signed on our 5th anniversary, and a future sketched in pencil with hopeful strokes. Children traveled to Tuscany and Kyoto, growing old together in a house filled with laughter and love. David was now an executive vice president at Sterling Rowe, a prestigious marketing firm where ambition was currency and loyalty was conditional. With his promotion 6 months ago came Chloe, 25 years old, glossy blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, and a smile that never quite reached her calculating blue eyes. I'd met her once at the company Christmas party, where she'd hovered near David like a moth drawn to an irresistible flame. "David tells me you're an artist," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension as she examined her perfectly manicured nails. How quaint. "I don't like her," I told David later that night, scrubbing off makeup in our ensuite bathroom while he scrolled through emails on his phone, the blue light illuminating his face in an eerie glow. "She's efficient, Em. That's all that matters," he'd replied, his tone dismissive and final. That should have been my second sign. The phone, that never left his hand, always face down on the marble counter, always charging in his home office instead of beside me in bed where it had rested for years. The third sign came in early April, during my annual spring cleaning ritual. I was emptying David's suit pockets before sending them to the cleaners, a task I'd performed hundreds of times as an act of love, a domestic language I'd perfected over our years together. Tucked inside the silk lining of his charcoal Tom Ford suit was a receipt, not for gas or lunch or office supplies. L'Étoile, the exclusive French restaurant we'd bookmarked for our 10th anniversary, saving for months to afford the experience. The date on the receipt? Last Tuesday. The very night he'd called at 9 p.m., his voice tight with fabricated urgency about emergency meetings that couldn't wait until morning. 2 entrees, coq au vin and bouillabaisse, a bottle of Chateau Margaux 380, and scrawled in the margin in David's distinctive handwriting, "To many more nights like this. D." My hands shook so violently I dropped the receipt. It fluttered to the laundry room floor like a wounded bird, the paper seeming to pulse with accusation in the dim light. The scent of lavender detergent suddenly turned my stomach, the familiar smell now associated with deception. I sank to my knees on the cool concrete floor, pressing my forehead against the unforgiving surface. Who was he with? Why this restaurant of all places? How long has this been going on? The questions were vultures circling my sanity, their sharp beaks pecking at the fragile remnants of my trust. I wanted to storm into his office, scream until my throat was raw, throw things until the house was in shambles. but fear cold, paralyzing fear rooted me to the spot. Fear of shattering the illusion I'd so carefully constructed. Fear of being alone. Fear that the life I'd curated with such devotion was nothing more than a house of cards, waiting to collapse with the slightest breath of truth. Chapter 2. The Unraveling of Illusions. Over the next 3 weeks, David's absences became a symphony of increasingly elaborate excuses. Client dinner in Stamford that can't be postponed. Quarterly reports are due, and Henderson will have my head if they're not perfect. Chloe needs help with the Henderson account presentation. She's brilliant, but lacks confidence. Chloe? Her name became a shard of glass in every conversation, cutting through my composure with each mention. I started noticing other things, subtle changes that accumulated like evidence in a case I was building against my own happiness. The sudden gym membership. Gotta stay competitive in this industry. Appearance matters. The new shirts I'd never seen before. Chloe picked them out. She's got great taste. You should ask her sometime. The way he'd jump when his phone buzzed, shielding the screen like it contained state secrets rather than illicit messages. One night, I woke at 3 a.m. to an empty bed. David sighed cold and untouched. Downstairs, the blue glow of his laptop spilled from his home office beneath the door. I crept closer, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the slight crack in the door, I could see him video calling someone. I couldn't see the screen, but I heard her laugh. That practiced musical tinkle that had grated on my nerves at the Christmas party. "You're terrible," she giggled, the sound carrying clearly in the silent house. "Miss you too, babe." David clicked shut the laptop as I approached, his movements jerky with guilt. "Just wrapping up some last-minute work," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" The breaking point came in mid-May. David announced an emergency conference in Chicago that required his immediate attention. 3 days max, the Henderson deal is imploding, and I need to be there to salvage it. He packed hurriedly, tossing clothes into a suitcase with none of his usual care. He kissed my forehead, a perfunctory peck that lacked all warmth, and promised to call when he landed. He didn't. At 2 a.m., his phone went straight to voicemail. At 3 a.m., consumed by a dread I could no longer ignore, I opened my laptop, logged into our shared iCloud account. We used it for family photos, vacation albums, memories we'd carefully curated over the years. As I scrolled through our digital life together, a folder caught my eye. Work Trip Chicago. Not our usual naming convention of Chicago 2023 or Sterling Conference. My fingers trembled as I clicked. The first photo, David and Chloe against the glittering Chicago skyline. Not in business attire. David in a casual linen shirt with the top 2 buttons undone. Chloe in a floral sundress that showed off her tanned shoulders, his arms slung low around her waist, her head nestled intimately against his shoulder. They looked comfortable, familiar, like they'd done this many times before. The second photo, dinner at L'Etoile, the same bottle of Chateau Margaux we'd been saving, the same table by the window with its panoramic view of the city. Chloe feeding him a bite of chocolate mousse dessert, her eyes locked on his with an intimacy that made my stomach clench. The third photo, a hotel room, city lights glittering behind them like scattered diamonds. David's hands tangled in her blonde hair, their lips locked in a passionate embrace. The camera flash caught the glint of his wedding ring, our wedding ring on the hand that cupped her face. I slammed the laptop shut so hard the sound echoed through the silent house. The screen went black, but the images burned behind my eyelids, branded into my memory with searing intensity. 8 years. Vows exchanged before God and our families. Dreams carefully woven together like a tapestry. all reduced to pixels in a hidden folder. Evidence of a betrayal so profound it stole my breath. I wasn't angry yet, just hollow. A vessel emptied of everything but the bitter dregs of betrayal. Chapter 3. Confrontation and Collapse. David returned 2 days later, dropping his suitcase by the door like it weighed nothing more than a feather. "You're home early," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. I sat in the living room, the laptop open on the coffee table, screen displaying the incriminating Chicago skyline photo. "Conference wrapped early," he said, loosening his tie with a weary sigh. "Missed you." He leaned in to kiss me, the scent of that unfamiliar floral perfume clinging to him like an accusation. I flinched away, the movement instinctive and undeniable. "Did you?" I turned the laptop toward him, the screen illuminating his suddenly pale face. "Because it looks like you were pretty busy in Chicago." Color drained from his face like water down a drain. He stared, speechless for a moment, then stammered, "It's not what it looks like?" My voice rose, brittle as shattered glass. "You took her to our anniversary restaurant. You stayed in our favorite hotel. You kissed her wearing my ring." "It just happened," he whispered, sinking into the armchair like his legs could no longer support him. "We were working late. Stress. One thing led to another." "How long?" The words tore from my throat, raw and ragged. He looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of stolen moments, of me making his favorite meals, ironing his shirts, planning our future while he planned his escape with another woman. "The one you love?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound that held no humor. "You have a funny way of showing it, David. Was any of it real? The late nights, the business trips, the I love yous whispered in the dark?" "Of course it was real," he pleaded, reaching for my hand with desperation. "I love you." She meant nothing. I snatched my hand back as if his touch burned me. "Don't touch me. You don't get to touch me anymore. You hurt me in the worst possible way. You lied. You cheated. You made a fool out of me in front of God and everyone." "I'll end it," he begged, tears welling in his eyes. "Today, we'll go to counseling. We'll fix this. For us." "Us?" I stood, towering over him with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "There is no us anymore. There's you, and there's me, and there's the wreckage of what you destroyed. I want you out. Pack your things. Get out of my house." "Emily, please. Now." He left that night with a single suitcase and a string of promises that sounded like static noise in the silence of our shattered home. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, my bedroom now, and cried until dawn, the tears cleansing nothing, only carving deeper valleys of pain in my soul. I cried for the girl who believed in forever, for the trust I'd given so freely, for the children we'd never have now, for the future that dissolved like sugar in the rain, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Book 2, The Anatomy of Healing. Chapter 4, Picking Up the Pieces. The next morning, I called my sister Sarah. She lived 2 hours away but arrived at my door by noon, armed with ice cream, wine, and a fury that matched my own. "He's a cowardly, selfish bastard," she declared, handing me a spoon and a pint of chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. "The biggest idiot in the world." "I must have been blind," I mumbled, digging into the pint with a vengeance. "How did I not see it?" "Because you loved him," Sarah said, squeezing my shoulder with a strength that belied her slender frame. "Because you trusted him. There's no shame in that. The shame is his." Over the following weeks, I navigated a haze of logistics and grief that threatened to consume me entirely. I met with a divorce lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Anita, who called David a textbook case of midlife crisis and assured me we'd get everything I was entitled to. I filed papers that felt like signing away part of my soul. I changed the locks on the doors, the sound of the tumblers turning into plays satisfyingly final. I started therapy with Dr. Lena, a gentle woman with kind eyes who held space for my rage and my sorrow without judgment. Grief isn't linear, she told me during our second session. Some days you'll be fine. Others, the smell of his cologne will bring you to your knees. That's okay. Honor whatever you're feeling in the moment. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Maya, a fierce journalist who traveled the world and lived life boldly. Ben, a poet with a kind soul and wisdom beyond his years. Priya, a doctor who prescribed wine and wisdom in equal measure. We gathered in my kitchen, now stripped of David's presence, filling it with laughter, stories, and the warmth of genuine connection. One rainy Tuesday, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found my old portfolio from college. Inside were sketches of Parisian cafes, watercolors of Tuscan hills, oil paintings of stormy seas work I'd abandoned when I put my dreams on hold to support David's career. As I flipped through the pages, a spark ignited in my chest. Passion, purpose, me? I enrolled in a community art class at the local rec center. The first session was terrifying, my hands shaking as I mixed colors, the canvas before me intimidatingly blank. But the instructor, a gruff but kind man named Leo, who'd once been a renowned artist in New York, saw something in my tentative brushstrokes. "You've got fire in your work," he grunted, pointing to a particularly bold stroke of crimson. "Don't let it die." I started painting again. At first, it was dark, angry slashes of red and black, abstract forms of pain and betrayal. Then, slowly, color seeped back in. Blues like the ocean, yellows like sunlight, greens like new growth after a forest fire. I painted my heartbreak, my anger, my fragile hope, each canvas a chapter in my healing journey. Chapter 5. The first brushstroke of a new life. 6 months after David moved out, my divorce was finalized. The papers arrived certified mail, and I signed them with a steady hand, feeling lighter than I had in months. That same week, I submitted 3 pieces to a local art show. Shattered, a fractured vase mended with gold leaf. Empty space, a lone chair in a vast empty room, and dawn, a horizon bleeding with light after a storm. To my shock, dawn sold opening night to a woman who stood before it for 20 minutes, tears streaming down her face. The buyer, Eleanor Vance, the elegant owner of the Vanguard Gallery downtown, a space I'd admired for years but never dreamed of showing in. "I haven't painted seriously in years," I admitted, clutching my wine glass like a lifeline as Eleanor approached me. "Experience lives in your work," Eleanor said, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Raw, honest, transformative. I'd like to offer you a solo exhibition, 3 months from now." I almost dropped my glass. "Me? A solo show? At the Vanguard?" "You, your story, your vision. Say yes, Emily." I said yes, the word feeling like both a promise and a prayer. The next 3 months were a blur of creation and revelation. I painted every day, sometimes 12 hours straight, losing myself in the rhythm of brush on canvas, the dance of color and form. I explored themes of brokenness and repair, inspired by kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold. Cracks became a series. Fractured portraits mended with metallic leaf, landscapes scarred by storms, yet blooming with wildflowers. Abstract pieces where the breaks in the composition became the most beautiful elements. Sarah helped me stretch canvases and brought me coffee when I worked through the night. Ben brought me pastries and wrote poems inspired by my work, reading them aloud in my studio as the sun rose. Priya listened when I doubted myself, reminding me of the strength I'd shown in leaving David. "You're not just painting, Em," she said one evening as we sat surrounded by half-finished canvases. "You're healing. Each stroke is a step forward." The exhibition opened on a crisp October evening, the gallery buzzing with energy collectors, critics, friends, family, and strangers drawn by the promise of something new and authentic. My work lined the walls, a visual symphony of pain transformed into beauty. Shattered hung near the entrance, its golden seams catching the light and throwing warm reflections across the room. Dawn dominated the back wall, radiant and hopeful, drawing people toward it like a beacon. As I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by people celebrating my art, my journey, my vision, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, a scar on my soul, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't David's abandoned wife. I wasn't the woman he cheated on. I was Emily, an artist, a survivor, whole. Chapter 6. Echoes and Encounters. I saw David once after the divorce, at a coffee shop near the Vanguard. He was alone, thinner than I remembered, gray threading his temples at the temples, his expensive suit looking slightly too big on his diminished frame. He approached my table hesitantly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, "heard about your show. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, my expression carefully composed. "How are you?" His eyes searched mine, desperate for something forgiveness, validation. I wasn't sure. "I'm good," I said, and realized with surprise that it was true. Really good. We made small talk for 5 minutes, awkward, stilted, filled with references to weather and mutual acquaintances. Then he left, walking away with a slight slump to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. As I watched him disappear into the crowd, I felt nothing. No anger. No regret. Just quiet closure. The man I had loved was gone. This stranger wearing his face meant nothing to me. A year after discovering the affair, I stood in my new apartment, a sun-drenched loft with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. My paintings adorned the walls, vibrant splashes of color against the industrial backdrop. Plants thrived in the abundant light, their green leaves reaching toward the sun. I had a career I loved, friends who were family, and a relationship with myself that was deeper and more honest than any I'd had with another person. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about David and Chloe. Were they still together? Had he cheated on her too, as he had on me? Did he ever regret throwing away our marriage, our home, our future? The thoughts came, but they no longer kept me awake. They were just ghosts, fading with time, like photographs left too long in the sun. Book 3, The Resurrection of Self. Chapter 7, The Residency in Provence. One spring morning, an email changed everything. It was from the director of Atelier des Lumières, a prestigious art residency in Provence, France. They had seen my work at the Vanguard and were offering me a 3-month residency in their historic stone studio. I stared at the screen, tears blurring the words that felt too good to be true. France, Provence, time to create, to breathe, to be. I accepted without hesitation, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. The residency was transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined. I painted in a stone studio overlooking endless fields of lavender that shimmered in the heat like a purple sea. I wandered through ancient markets bursting with color and scent mounds of saffron, pyramids of olives, baskets of sun-ripened fruit. I sketched in medieval villages where time seemed to stand still, narrow cobblestone streets winding between stone buildings that had witnessed centuries of human drama. I met artists from around the world, sculptors from Italy, writers from Japan, photographers from Brazil, each with their own stories of struggle and triumph, each finding their voice in this magical place. One evening, over wine and cheese that tasted of the sun and soil, a sculptor named Marco asked about my work. "I paint transformation," I told him, watching the firelight dance in his dark eyes. Finding beauty in broken places, honoring the scars as part of the journey. He nodded thoughtfully, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. "We all have broken places, Emily. The art is in how we choose to piece them back together, what we highlight and what we let fade." His words resonated deeply, settling into my soul like seeds in fertile ground. That night, I began a new series, Mended. Large canvases exploring the idea that scars are not flaws to be hidden, but maps of survival to be celebrated. I used gold leaf, bold strokes of color, and layers of translucent glaze, creating works that felt both fragile and powerful, broken yet whole. Chapter 8, Homecoming and Horizon. I returned home with a portfolio full of new work and a heart full of peace. The Vanguard scheduled a new exhibition for the Mended series, and opening night was electric. Critics raved about the evolution in my work, the depth of emotion, the technical mastery. Collectors bought pieces before the exhibition even officially opened, and several museums expressed interest in acquiring works for their permanent collections. As I stood amidst my art, surrounded by love and success, I felt a profound sense of gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. My pain had not been wasted. It had been transformed into something meaningful, something that spoke to others, something that might help them navigate their own darkness. A few weeks later, a reporter from Art Soul magazine interviewed me for a feature on emerging artists. We met at a quiet cafe near my gallery, her recorder between us on the wooden table. "Your work is deeply personal," she said, flipping through her notes. "Can you talk about what inspires you?" I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of coffee and pastries comforting me. A few years ago, I discovered that my husband was having an affair with his secretary. It shattered my world, destroyed the life I thought I had. But in the process of rebuilding, I rediscovered my art, my strength, myself. These paintings are about that journey, about how the cracks in our lives can become the most beautiful parts of us if we're brave enough to face them, to honor them, to let them transform us rather than break us completely. The article published a month later, and the response was overwhelming. Emails and messages poured in from people around the world who had connected with my story, who had found their own healing in my work. One message from a woman named Lisa in Seattle stayed with me long after I read it. "Your story gave me hope when I had none. Thank you for showing me that there's life after the lies, beauty after the betrayal, strength I didn't know I possessed." Chapter 9, The Unwritten Canvas. Today, I stand on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink that shift and deepen like watercolors bleeding into one another. My latest canvas leans against the wall in my studio blank, white, full of possibility. I don't know what I'll paint yet. Maybe the ocean that calls to me with its rhythmic tides. Maybe mountains that touch the sky with their ancient, enduring presence. Maybe something entirely new. Something I haven't yet imagined. The journey from betrayal to this moment hasn't been easy. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, the weight of grief pressing down on me like physical lead. Nights I cried until I was empty, my tears leaving tracks on my pillow like rivers of sorrow. Moments I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again, if the cracks in my heart would ever mend. But with each step forward, each brushstroke on canvas, each connection made with others who understood my pain, I pieced myself back together, not as the woman I was before David's betrayal, but as the woman I am becoming. Stronger, wiser, more authentic, more fully myself. I don't know what the future holds. Will I fall in love again? Will I have the family I once dreamed of? Will my art continue to evolve and touch others? I don't know. And that's okay. For the first time in a long time, the uncertainty feels exciting, not terrifying. Life after heartbreak isn't just possible, it's beautiful, messy, unpredictable, and entirely mine. And that, I've learned through this painful, transformative journey, is more than enough. As the last light fades and the city begins to sparkle with artificial stars, I pick up my brush. I dip it in paint gold, like the seams in my broken places, and begin. The canvas is blank, the story is unwritten, the future is mine, and I am ready. Book 4, The Tapestry of Tomorrow, Chapter 10, The Gallery's Growth. The vanguard flourished under Eleanor's guidance and my growing reputation. What had once been a modest downtown gallery transformed into a cultural destination, my name becoming synonymous with emotional authenticity in artistic expression. Eleanor and I developed a rhythm. She handled the business with razor-sharp acumen while I immersed myself in creation. Our partnership deepened beyond professional boundaries. She became a mentor, confidant, and unexpectedly, a friend who understood the language of loss and reinvention. We expanded the gallery's vision, showcasing emerging artists whose work spoke to transformation and resilience. Each exhibition told a story, not just of artistic technique, but of human experience. Visitors didn't just view art, they felt it, connected with it, found pieces of their own stories reflected in the canvases before them. The gallery became a sanctuary for those healing from their own heartbreaks, a place where vulnerability was honored rather than hidden. My own work evolved during this period. The Mended series gave way to Roots, an exploration of how we establish new foundations after upheaval. I painted trees growing through cracked pavement, flowers blooming in volcanic ash, rivers carving new paths through stone. Each piece celebrated nature's relentless insistence on life, on growth, on beauty emerging from destruction. Critics called it my most mature work yet, technically accomplished, emotionally resonant, thematically unified. Chapter 11, The Unexpected Connection. James arrived at the gallery on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a sculpture in tow and uncertainty in his eyes. A ceramic artist from Oregon, he'd been driving cross-country, gathering inspiration for a new series when his car broke down in our city. Eleanor saw potential in his work-raw, organic pieces that seemed to capture movement in stillness, and offered him space in our upcoming group exhibition. I was immediately drawn to his quiet intensity, the way his hands moved when he described his creative process, the depth in his hazel eyes that suggested layers of experience beyond his 35 years. We talked for hours that first day about art, about travel, about the stories that shape us. He spoke of losing his father young, of finding solace in clay, of the healing power of creating something tangible from formless material. I shared fragments of my own journey, careful not to reveal too much too soon. Our connection grew slowly, naturally. He'd bring coffee to my studio in the mornings. I'd save him dinner when he worked late at the gallery. We attended gallery openings together, our shoulders brushing as we studied the art, our conversations flowing easily between intellectual discussion and comfortable silence. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people who recognized something familiar in each other, who understood that some wounds leave marks that never completely fade, but become part of who we are. 4 months after his arrival, As we walked along the riverfront at sunset, he took my hand. "I don't know what this is between us, Emily," he said softly, "but I know I want to find out." I squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the fading sunlight. "Me too," I whispered. And for the first time since David, the possibility of love didn't feel like a threat, but like a gift. Chapter 12. The Ghosts Revisited. David reappeared in my life unexpectedly, through a mutual friend's wedding invitation. Sarah and I debated whether I should attend. She worried it would reopen wounds I'd worked so hard to heal. But I felt a strange sense of curiosity, a desire to see the man who had once been my entire world through the eyes of the woman I had become. The wedding was elegant, held in a vineyard at the height of autumn. David arrived with Chloe, their relationship apparently still intact, despite or perhaps because of its foundation of deceit. She clung to his arm, her smile tight as she surveyed the room, her eyes widening slightly when she saw me. I stood across the room, James's hand resting reassuringly at the small of my back, feeling an unexpected surge of pity rather than anger. David looked older, his face lined with stress, his eyes lacking the confidence I once found so compelling. Chloe, for all her youthful beauty, seemed diminished somehow, her identity clearly tied to being David's partner rather than her own person. During the reception, David approached me while James was getting drinks. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, "you look... well." "Thank you, David. You too." I kept my tone neutral, pleasant even. "I saw your feature in Art Forum," he continued, shifting his weight. "The Root series is powerful. I appreciate that." I offered nothing more, letting the silence stretch between us. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly, vulnerability flashing in his eyes. I considered the question carefully, thinking of James waiting for me, of my thriving career, of the peace I'd found within myself. "Yes, David, I am." He nodded, a flicker of something regret, crossing his face before he turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling not triumph, but closure. The chapter was truly closed. Chapter 13. The new chapter. James and I built our relationship slowly, intentionally. We communicated openly about our past, our fears, our hopes. He knew about David and Chloe, about the betrayal that had shattered my world. I learned about his failed marriage, about how his ex-wife had resented the time he devoted to his art, about the loneliness that had driven him to leave Oregon with no clear destination. We didn't rush. We savored each discovery, each moment of connection. 6 months into our relationship, he asked me to collaborate on an exhibition. "Your paintings and my sculptures," he explained, his eyes alight with excitement. A dialogue between two-dimensional and three-dimensional, between permanence and impermanence. The idea thrilled me. The opportunity to create together, to blend our visions, to build something new from our combined experiences. We worked side by side in our studios, my canvases and his clay pieces evolving in conversation with each other. The process was intimate, revealing, sometimes challenging as we navigated creative differences and learned to compromise. But the result was extraordinary. A cohesive body of work that felt greater than the sum of its parts. The exhibition, titled Convergence, opened to critical acclaim, selling out within days. Standing in the gallery surrounded by our joint creation, James's arm around my shoulders, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of having arrived exactly where I was meant to be. Chapter 14. The Family. We choose. Sarah's pregnancy brought unexpected joy into my life. At 38, she'd almost given up on motherhood when she met Daniel, a widower with 2 young children who loved her as much as she did them. Now, as her belly swelled with new life, I found myself looking forward to being an aunt, a role I'd never imagined for myself. During my marriage to David, when children had always been part of our distant future, I painted throughout her pregnancy, creating a series of intimate portraits celebrating the female form in all its stages of life. Sarah sat for me often, her face glowing with maternal radiance, her hands resting protectively on her growing belly. These sessions became sacred time between us, talking about everything and nothing, strengthening the bond that had sustained me through my darkest days. When baby Lily was born, I was there in the delivery room, holding Sarah's hand, witnessing the miracle of new life. As I held my niece for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I felt a shift in my perspective. The family I had once dreamed of with David might never materialize, but I was surrounded by love in my sister, in James, in my friends, in my chosen family of artists and kindred spirits who had become my support system. Chapter 15. The International Recognition. The Convergence exhibition caught the attention of the international art world. We received invitations to show in Paris, Tokyo, New York. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying, stepping onto the global stage, exposing our work to new audiences, navigating the complexities of international art markets. James handled the logistics with characteristic calm, while I focused on creating new pieces for each venue. We traveled together, experiencing different cultures, gathering inspiration, growing both as artists and as partners. In Paris, we walked along the Seine at dawn, the city's beauty seeping into our work. In Tokyo, we found inspiration in the contrast between ancient traditions and cutting-edge technology. In New York, we navigated the frenetic energy of the art world with growing confidence. The recognition brought financial security I had never known before. We bought a small farmhouse outside the city, with studios for both of us and space for a garden. I planted roses and lavender, creating a sanctuary that nurtured both my art and my spirit. James built a kiln behind the house, the scent of firing clay becoming as familiar to me as the smell of oil paint. Chapter 16. The Full Circle. 5 years after discovering David's betrayal, I stood in a museum in Florence, surrounded by my Roots series. The exhibition had traveled from New York to London to now Italy, a journey that mirrored my own transformation. James stood beside me, his hand in mine, as we watched visitors move through the gallery, their faces reflecting the emotions my work evoked. An elderly woman approached one of my paintings, a massive canvas depicting an olive tree growing through cracked stone. She studied it for a long time, tears streaming down her face. When she turned to leave, she caught my eye. "Grazie," she whispered, touching her heart. "This is my story too." In that moment, I understood the full circle of my journey. The pain that had once threatened to destroy me had become the source of my greatest strength, my deepest connection to others. My art wasn't just about my healing anymore. It was about creating space for others to heal, to see their own experiences reflected and honored. That evening, James and I dined at a small trattoria overlooking the Arno River. As we shared a bottle of Chianti and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, he squeezed my hand. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my art was about making things that would last beyond me. But being with you, seeing how your work touches people, I understand now that it's about connection, about leaving behind something that matters." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling a profound sense of peace. "We've both come a long way, haven't we?" He kissed the top of my head. "And we've got a long way to go. Together." Chapter 17. The Next Horizon. Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. We divided our time between the city gallery and the countryside studio, finding inspiration in both environments. My work continued to evolve, the Roots series giving way to Horizons explorations of possibility, of the unknown future, of the courage to step into the unknown. James and I began discussing collaboration on a different scale, a permanent installation that would combine our mediums in an interactive experience. We sketched ideas late into the night, our excitement growing as the concept took shape. The project would take years to complete, requiring new skills, new techniques, new ways of thinking about art and space. On my 40th birthday, we gathered with friends and family at the farmhouse. Sarah and Danielle brought Lily, now a bright, curious 4-year-old who loved Auntie M's colorful pictures. Eleanor flew in from New York, bearing gifts and news of gallery expansions. Ben read a poem he'd written for the occasion, capturing the essence of my journey with his characteristic insight. As I looked around the table at the faces of people who had supported me, challenged me, loved me through my transformation, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After dinner, James led me to the studio he'd built for me as a birthday surprise. It was perfect north-facing windows for consistent light, ample storage for supplies, a comfortable seating area for contemplation. In the center of the room stood a blank canvas, enormous and inviting. "For your next chapter," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Whatever you want it to be." I turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had helped me rebuild my life, who had shown me that love could be gentle and strong, who had never asked me to be anything less than fully myself. "I love you," I said, the words feeling both new and familiar, true in a way I'd never experienced before. "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, "now and always." Chapter 18. The Unfolding Masterpiece. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The installation project proved more complex than we'd anticipated, requiring us to learn new technologies, to navigate bureaucratic hurdles, to push the boundaries of our respective mediums. There were moments of frustration, of doubt, of exhaustion, but there were also moments of pure joy, of breakthrough ideas, of technical solutions discovered, of seeing our vision take tangible form. My art continued to evolve, reflecting the different seasons of my life. After Sarah's second child was born, I created a series celebrating motherhood in all its forms: biological, adoptive, chosen. When James's mother passed away, I explored themes of loss and legacy in my work. Through it all, the thread of transformation remained constant, the gold seams of kintsugi weaving through everything I created. We traveled less frequently, choosing instead to deepen our roots in the community. We mentored young artists, hosted workshops at the gallery, volunteered with arts programs for underserved youth. Our lives became rich with connection, with purpose, with meaning that extended beyond our individual successes. On our 10th anniversary, we returned to Florence, to the museum where my Roots series had first been exhibited. This time, we were there to unveil our collaborative installation, a room-sized experience that combined my paintings with James's sculptures, with light and sound, creating an immersive environment that responded to viewers' movements. As people entered the space, their faces illuminated with wonder, I felt the same sense of rightness I'd experienced years ago, watching that elderly woman connect with my work. After the unveiling, James and I walked along the Arno, hand in hand, the city lights reflecting in the water below. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't found those photos?" he asked quietly. I considered the question. The pain of that discovery still lived in me, a scar that had become part of my landscape. But so had the strength I'd found in rebuilding myself, the passion I'd rediscovered in my art, the love I'd found with him. Sometimes, I admitted, but then I think about everything that came after, about finding my voice, about meeting you, about this life we've built, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. He stopped walking, turning to face me. The Florentine lights danced in his eyes, reflecting the love that had grown between us over the years. You know, he said, when I met you, you were like a beautiful vase that had been broken and carefully put back together. The cracks were part of your story, part of what made you who you are. But now you're like a whole new creation, something that never could have existed without those breaks, but has become something entirely different, something stronger, more beautiful, more alive. The tears filled my eyes as I understood the truth of his words. The betrayal that had shattered my world had also broken me open, allowing me to discover parts of myself I might never have known otherwise. The pain had been real, devastating even, but it had not been the end of my story. It had been the beginning of a new one. As we continued our walk along the river, I thought about the blank canvas waiting for me in my studio, about the unwritten chapters of my life still to come. The journey from betrayal to this moment hadn't been easy, but it had been mine. Every painful step, every hard-won victory, every moment of grace and connection. And as I looked toward the future, I felt not fear but excitement for the art yet to be created, for the love yet to be deepened, for the life yet to be lived. The story wasn't over. It was unfolding, one brushstroke at a time, into a masterpiece I could never have imagined but was grateful to be living.